Dawn came gently to Pearl Harbor that Sunday, December 7th, 1941. The water mirrored a flawless Hawaiian sky. Sunlight spilled across the decks of battleships resting at anchored. Sailors polished brass rails, swapped jokes, wrote letters home. It was payday weekend, a morning meant for rest, not for history. On the island, families moved through familiar rituals, frying eggs, sweeping porches, reading newspapers that spoke of Europe's far-off war. Children chased each other through palm-shadowed yards. Fishermen pushed boats into calm blue water. Even the base itself felt easy, another tropical day in paradise. Just beyond the horizon, however, the air was different. 90 minutes before sunrise in Japan, pilots had climbed into cockpits painted with red suns. Their orders were sealed. Across an empty Pacific, they came, hundreds of miles of ocean separating peace from the unthinkable. Back at Pearl Harbor, few noticed the faint drone in the distance. The morning was too beautiful to imagine danger. A sailor on the USS Nevada looked up from his coffee. Funny, he said, those don't sound like our planes. It was 7:48 a.m. The sky split open. A torpedo struck the USS Oklahoma. Water erupted 30 feet high. Within seconds, the peaceful harbor became a furnace. Bombs screamed down from the clouds, turning ships into volcanoes of steel and fire. A flash brighter than sunrise ripped through the USS Arizona. The explosion lifted her from the water. Black smoke towered above Oahu. In one instant, more than 1,000 men were gone. The blast rolled across the island like thunder from the gods. Civilians in Honolulu looked up, shading their eyes. It's a drill, someone shouted, but another bomb fell, and the streets erupted. Windows shattered in churches, palm trees bent beneath pressure waves. Children clutched their mothers as the world came apart. On the harbor's edge, sailors dived through burning oil, swimming through flame to reach survivors. Men hauled shipmates from the water, faces streaked with ash and blood. A young gunner, barely 20, kept firing even as the deck beneath him burned. Around him, America's Pacific Fleet, once proud, invincible, listed and sank in its own home port. In the skies above, Japanese Commander Mitsuo Fukuda looked down upon the inferno. Over the radio he sent 3 words: Tora, 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 Tiger, 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 the signal of perfect surprise. For the Americans below, surprise turned to defiance. Medics turned mess halls into hospitals. Civilians formed bucket lines against walls of fire. The USS Nevada, engines roaring, tried to steam toward open sea, her hull riddled, but her crew unwilling to surrender. Everywhere, courage answered chaos. Across the island, hangars blazed at Hickam Field. Mechanics pushed half-destroyed planes onto runways, shooting pistols at the sky. Nurses bandaged wounds with torn uniforms. Priests offered last rites amid smoke and sirens. The harbor that had begun the morning as paradise was now hell made real. 90 minutes. That was all it took. When the final bomb fell, Pearl Harbor was a graveyard of ships. Battleships lay capsized, lifeboats drifted among slicks of burning oil. The air reeked of salt and smoke and lost. 2,403 Americans were dead. The Pacific lay silent, save for the hiss of fire on water. But amid the smoke, something stirred, a kind of quiet fury. Sailors who could still move searched through wreckage for the living. They fought not just the flames, but despair itself. Above them the sky, once blue, now glowed red and gray, a dawn of a different kind. Messages sped by radio cable. Air raid on Pearl Harbor. This is no drill. In Washington, D.C., teletype machines clattered. Across the continental United States, radios crackled to life. Families leaned closer, hearts pounding, as the news reached them. A world away, America was under attack. As evening fell over Oahu, the fires still burned, reflected in the harbor's dark water. Sailors stood watch beside wrecks that had been their homes. They were exhausted, grieving, but not broken. Out of the smoke, a single vow began to form, carried from lip to lip: we'll remember, and we'll make it right. December 7th had ended the age of American innocence. The sleeping giant was awake. In Washington, the news arrived like lightning through a storm. At the White House, aides rushed between offices, telegrams and shaking hands. Pearl Harbor bombed, heavy casualties. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt sat behind his desk, the weight of the nation settling on his shoulders. Outside, winter twilight deepened. Inside, history was being written. Across America, the sound of ordinary life had stopped. Radios interrupted Sunday hymns. In diners and living rooms, people held their breath. Some wept, some clenched their fists. The impossible had become real. Roosevelt dictated the words himself. Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. He wrote and rewrote, line by line, each phrase deliberate, each pause meant to steel the heart of a wounded country. The next morning, December 8th, he faced Congress. His voice, calm and steady, carried to millions listening by radio. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked. The chamber erupted, not in confusion, but in resolve. Within an hour, America was at war. Across the nation, flags appeared in windows. Long lines formed outside recruiting stations. Fathers enlisted beside their sons. College students closed books and boarded trains. Women rolled up their sleeves, walked into factories, and kept production lines alive through the night. The entire country became an engine of purpose. In Detroit, the clatter of car assembly turned to the thunder of bomber wings. Shipyards in California glowed through the dark as sparks flew from welders' torches. Towns that had slept through the Depression now pulsed with energy. For every life lost at Pearl Harbor, 1,000 new hands joined the work. Families rationed sugar and gasoline. Children collected scrap metal for the war effort. Loose lips might sink ships, hung on every wall. The war had entered every home, every meal, every dream. Yet amid sacrifice grew something larger than fear, unity. In churches and classrooms, Roosevelt's words echoed. With confidence in our armed forces, with the unbounding determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph. So help us God. Across both coasts, those words became a pledge. But the grief was still fresh. Telegrams arrived daily, short and merciless. Gold stars replaced blue in windows where sons would not return. America mourned, but even in mourning, it moved forward. The men of Pearl Harbor buried their fallen, raised their flag over ruins, and rebuilt. The ships that could be saved were raised, repaired, reborn. The sailors who had swum through flame signed up again for duty. The United States had been wounded, but now it was forging steel from that wound. Around the world, allies took notice. Enemies prepared for what was coming. From that quiet harbor on an island in the Pacific had risen a storm that would sweep across the globe. And so, as factories thundered, as soldiers trained beneath winter skies, the nation braced itself. The next chapter would not be fought on Hawaiian shores, but across oceans, continents, and hearts. Pearl Harbor was the spark. What came next would redefine the world. The smoke from Pearl Harbor had hardly cleared when America began to move. The word revenge was whispered in barracks, but another word soon replaced it, resolve. Across a continent, telegrams arrived in small towns and city towers alike. Report to duty. You've been called. The country needs you. A million footsteps echoed on station platforms. Soldiers in new khaki uniforms boarded trains whose whistles pierced the winter air. Mothers waved until the engines disappeared behind clouds of steam. Fathers saluted sons, too proud to cry where anyone could see. In classrooms, boys barely old enough to shave memorized maps of Europe. At airfields, instructors shouted over roaring propellers. On factory floors, the first female riveters tightened bolts on bomber wings and wiped grease from their faces with a smile of determination. America became an orchestra of effort. The tempo quickened with every passing week. Steel, rubber, copper, wheat. Everything transformed into motion. 1,000 small towns turned into pieces of one vast machine. From Detroit's auto lines rolled B-24s instead of Buicks. In California, shipyards launched destroyers faster than enemies could count them. Newspapers called it the arsenal of democracy. To the workers, it was simply the job. They worked without sleep, with ration cards and hope. Posters on factory walls read, "Do the job he left behind." And they did. At night, Radios glowed in kitchen corners. Families listened to the world in headlines. Battles, names of places no one could yet pronounce. Corregidor, Midway, Stalingrad. The war had left the harbor. It now circled the globe. Out at sea, American carriers hunted the enemy across blue infinity. Pilots who had once flown above Midwest cornfields now flew into clouds of tracer fire. The ocean became their battlefield, the sky their shield. When the news came back, Midway, June 1942, the tone changed. For Japanese carriers sunk. The tide had turned. Across America, cheers rose like a new dawn. For the first time since Pearl Harbor, victory had a name. Yet the cost was relentless. Each triumph was written in sacrifice. On the home front, ration lines lengthened, blackouts darkened cities, and every knock at the door made hearts skip. But the nation had found its rhythm. Factories thundered, soldiers marched, and liberty's engine roared on. In the quiet between shifts, letters traveled across oceans. Don't worry, Mom. Tell the kids I'm okay. Save me a slice of apple pie. Paper and ink carried love where voices could not. The world was burning, but in that fire, America was being remade. By 1944, the storm that began at Pearl Harbor had swept across continents. From the beaches of North Africa to the snows of Italy, the stars and stripes advanced one hard mile at a time. The United States had become not just a nation at war, but the heartbeat of a global alliance. In England, fields once home to sheep now hosted endless rows of American bombers. Pilots studied maps under lantern light, tracing lines toward a heavily guarded coast. The plan was simple in theory, impossible in practice. A cross-channel invasion that would decide the fate of civilization. June 6, 1944. D-Day. Dawn broke over the English Channel. More than 5,000 ships and 150,000 men faced the gray cliffs of Normandy. Waves slammed against the hulls. Engines drowned out prayer. And then, the doors dropped. They stepped into history. Some never made it 10 yards. Others crawled through sand and smoke until they touched French soil. Behind them, the greatest armada ever assembled kept coming. In the skies above, paratroopers drifted through dawn like ghosts of freedom. By nightfall, the beaches were theirs. The road to Berlin had begun. Back home, factory sirens wailed again, not for alarm, but for pride. Each victory bulletin meant another son still breathing. Women kept the assembly lines humming. School children filled war bond drives with nickels and dreams. The American home front was the invisible front line, and it never retreated. Far away in the Pacific, another war raged island by island. At Tarawa, at Saipan, at Iwo Jima, Marines carved footholds from coral and stone. The heat was unbearable, the enemy relentless. Yet still they climbed, flag in hand. When that flag rose over Mount Suribachi, a photographer caught it in a single frame, 6 silhouettes against the sky. It became more than a picture. It became the pulse of a nation. Back in the States, radio announcers read the news through tears. Our flag is flying on Iwo Jima. In diners and factories, people stood without knowing why. For a moment, everyone felt the same heartbeat. The war was nearing its climax. In Europe, Allied tanks thundered through the Ardennes. Hitler's last gamble, the Battle of the Bulge, froze men to their rifles. But they held. They always held. And then came spring. April 1945. In a bunker beneath Berlin, the warlord who had plunged the world into darkness was gone. On May 8th, Europe exhaled. Victory in Europe Day. Church bells rang from London to New York. But across the Pacific, another fight remained. Japan had not yet surrendered. American fleets gathered, larger than ever before. The battles of Okinawa and Leyte were waged with unimaginable ferocity. Each victory brought the end closer, and the casualty lists longer. Back home, the question rose on every lip. How much more must the world endure before peace returns? From the quiet harbor that had burned for years before to the storm that now consumed the globe, the journey had come full circle. America stood at the edge of victory and of something entirely new. The dawn of an age unlike any before was waiting just beyond the horizon. For long years, from the smoke of Pearl Harbor to the snows of Ardennes, from Midway's waves to the cliffs of Normandy, America had crossed fire to reach this moment. The giant awakened on that December morning now stood unbroken, its flag carried on every wind. The war in Europe was over, but across the Pacific, the struggle continued. Each island closer to Japan brought more fury, more sacrifice. Okinawa, the last step before the homeland, turned the sea red with fire. Soldiers and sailors alike whispered the same question. What will it take to end this? Far from the front lines, another kind of battle was unfolding. In desert laboratories across New Mexico, the Manhattan Project was racing time itself. Men and women in secrecy, guarded by wire and silence, harnessed forces no human had ever unleashed. The scientists called it the gadget. The generals called it the answer. On July 16, 1945, before dawn, a blinding light tore across the desert. In that moment, the world changed again. One observer whispered, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." They had built a weapon to end all wars, or to end all things. 3 weeks later, high above a sleeping city, the bomb bay doors of a B-29 opened. The plane's name was Enola Gay. Below, Hiroshima lay peaceful, unaware. The flash came brighter than the sun, followed by silence, and then a wind that erased an entire city from the earth. 3 days later, Nagasaki followed. In the ashes of those cities, the world glimpsed both its power and its peril. When the smoke cleared, Emperor Hirohito's voice broke through Japan's radio static. We must endure the unendurable. The war was over. On August 15, 1945, victory over Japan Day, the planet exhaled. In New York, Times Square erupted into a sea of faces, laughter, and tears. Confetti fell like snow. Strangers embraced in the streets. One sailor kissed a nurse beneath flashing headlines that simply read, "Peace." From farmhouses to city rooftops, America sang. After years of telegrams and ration cards, of blackouts and empty chairs, the war was finally done. But victory was not without cost. More than 400,000 Americans would never come home. They rested in quiet rows under foreign skies, from Normandy's cliffs to the jungles of the Pacific. Their absence was the price of peace. Yet in their place rose something enduring, a sense of duty that outlived the war itself. The soldiers returned, carrying the weight of what they'd seen. They traded helmets for hard hats, rifles for rings on wedding fingers. They built families, neighborhoods, highways, schools. The world's next great chapter began with their hands. Factories that once built bombers now made cars. Airfields turned into airports, connecting a planet they had helped save. America's power was no longer measured in weapons, but in possibility. The dream of peace, fragile, imperfect, precious, had become the new mission. In 1945, in the aftermath of ruin, the nations of the world gathered. From ashes, they built a council, the United Nations, to ensure that the voices of peace would never again be silenced by guns. America stood among them, its role no longer that of isolation, but of leadership. The storm had ended, but its echoes would never fade. At Pearl Harbor today, the water is calm again. Beneath its surface lies the USS Arizona, still resting, still bleeding tiny bubbles of oil, tears for those who never left her deck. Visitors stand in silence above her, watching the sunlight ripple across the water. The sound of the ocean mingles with whispered names, carved in marble. The harbor sleeps, but it remembers. From that single morning of fire came generations of freedom. The young men who fought, the women who built, the families who waited. Together they defined what it meant to be American. Not perfect, not unscarred, but resilient, unyielding, alive. They proved that courage is not born in moments of glory, but in the quiet decision to stand, even when the world falls apart. The war began with sirens and ended with silence. Between them stretched the greatest test in modern history. And when the smoke cleared, the United States stood, not as conqueror, but as guardian of a fragile peace. Out of tragedy rose unity. Out of darkness, light. Out of Pearl Harbor, a promise that freedom, once challenged, would rise again. As the sun rises over the Pacific, its reflection gleams on waves that once ran red. The flag still flies over the harbor, bright, steady, unbroken. The voices of the fallen echo through time, whispering across the water. Remember us, and keep the watch.